Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the dialogue. Today we are discussing about the current political crisis in Ethiopia, and we are trying to figure out what is the best way out. Where is Ethiopia going? Why there's continuously crisis in Ethiopia? We have special guests today. For the first time, Faisal Roble is joining us. It's well-known Somali academic. He does conferences, speaks a lot of different arenas, and having a lot of insights in what's happening in Ethiopia currently and what was happening in Ethiopia in the past. As well, our Amhara program director, Ato Atnafu, is with us. Atnafu, most of you know that he served the Ethiopian Air Force, and his friends right now are some of the generals that who are leading the war against TPLF. And on my side of the aisle, there's Gulet Kasim, that you know, Mr. Gulet, who is, of course, all of you know that he served he was a Marine, served the U.S. military, become a minister in Somalia. So he's trying to connect the dots. What will the consequences of the war in Ethiopia will have in Somalia and Somali politics? So having said that, gentlemen, welcome to the dialogue.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Yassin.
Okay, so let's just give quick background of what's happening right now and why are we in this war, and what is the your perspective of this current crisis. We'll start with Tuatnafu, please. Why this war started and what is the problem right now?
Well, thank you again, Mr. Yassin. This war has started when the political situation, or the fallout of the political situation between TPLF and what they call themselves reformists, led by Mr. Abiy, 2018. About 4 years ago. That contradiction increased year by year. And on one hand, we have the Mr. Abiy's government, who's trying to consolidate power by itself, trying to minimize any dissent, anybody who can challenge his authority. And on the other hand, there is a TPLF who ruled the country for 27 years, even though with allied four parties, which is EPRDF, the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Party, was mainly controlled by the TPLF as we know it. So they don't want to lose that hegemony and monopoly of power. On the other hand, they felt that they were pushed aside by the reformists very systematically in coalition with the Oromo politicians and Amhara politicians at the same time, Oro Amhara, if you remember it, in 2018. So this fallout increased, and the TPLF believe that this government is against their interest and their people. They all went to Makale and stationed there, and there was a political fallout here and there, and there were some people whom the federal government wants to put in justice, but TPLF refused because they don't consider the Abiy government as a legitimate government, and eventually the war broke out in November 2020. So if you ask me, the cause.
Before that, what I want is that specifically this current crisis, 2 years ago it started, and specifically there was, as we understand, negotiations that were happening between the TPLF and the Ethiopian government. There was a deadline on August 20th, and all suddenly this happened. Why?
Well, because both sides are not serious to settle their political differences on the table. That some of the contradictions they have couldn't be resolved by the dialogue. That's the problem. The international community was trying to search the peaceful dialogue. The US, the European Union, and the African Union were all involved to forge peace between these two parties. But unfortunately, they couldn't come up with the settlement. Why? Because they have differences that cannot be compromised. So resolve it. So that's the main thing, I believe.
We will go on the detail on the crisis
Yeah.
and continuing crisis, but I just want to give Faisal his introduction and why do you think this crisis started and the root cause. Dr. Faisal.
Thank you very much, and thanks to Meet at NAFO. The rest I know you guys very well. Well, Ethiopia is like many African countries, danger conflict-prone country. So we know that conflict has stalked the Ethiopian state. Why the current conflict that transformed into an open war took place in 2020 is really a very challenging question. And as you probably already enough indicated, the details would be argued by historians for many, many years to come. But I think it was Arnold Toynbee, one of the most celebrated historians in the West, who approached historical phenomena or even conflicts, to be specific, into underlying factors and immediate factors. So I think Adnafo very well touched it, and in my opinion, to a satisfactory level, went through the immediate issues, which mainly hinge on transitional failure of a government that was supposed to be moving from a more autocratic, closed administrative system into a quasi-democratic, not democratic, but quasi-democratic, so that the journey can begin. And basically, a conflict of past and present and future interests between teams that know each other very well during Gen. The TPLF cadre and knew very well how far Abiy can go. They had folders and folders of psychiatric and psychoanalysis of everybody that they trained, including Abiy Ahmed. So there was right away mutual mistrust between the two sides. And then, as Atanafu said, there was an element of TPLF not to really lose some of the benefits that it accumulated through the years. But at the same time, on the Abiy side, he did not massage conflict between his former comrades, but there was a heavy hand that was at times indiscriminate, from expropriating their businesses, some of their powers, some of their deep state powers. So basically, it was a conflict that was latent but mismanaged by the power that came into office right away, which was Abiy's team. I mean, by the time 2018, as the Oromara team took power and they brought other people, TPLF was basically, or could have been reduced, a background nuisance or contained, no matter what. I mean, a group that has been delegated to a regional government could have probably been contained, but Abiy didn't do that. Those are the immediate factors, and we can go deeper. And I think the history, as I said, consists of details and big pictures, so you can go to the details. I think the other aspect of history is the underlying factors. These are the historical, political, social underlying factors that again stopped Ethiopia since Emperor Haile Selassie inherited the Ethiopian current empire, which came through several stages, and all of us are very familiar with that history. But the closer underlying factor of this conflict is the debate, and I would call it the debate because it hasn't been settled and it will not be settled for a while. The debate of what type of state fits Ethiopia. Many people, particularly people of the peripheries, view the Ethiopian state formation one of imperial. Other forces in the center don't. They believe in what we call Ethiopian exceptionalism. In between that comes Abiy, who was supposed to really, in my opinion, mediate, not clamp down on one side or the other, but mediate these two forces that are on a journey to create what you call state formation, which is an incomplete process in the Ethiopian context. And I think the big failure of the Abiy camp, whether it is TPLF or that, is that they failed to bring those two forces together, and there gave TPLF a chance of revival, a power that was already spent, that already had issues with the larger sections of the Ethiopian society, were revived not because of what they put forward to us, but because a lot of people perceived that Abiy was clamping down on the very issue that the periphery groups care, such as the Oromos, the Somalis. And there, in a way, the conflict is there, but Abiy managed in a very mysterious way to breathe life back to TPLF.
Okay, I'll come back to, but what specifically, same question that I asked at NAFU, why all suddenly, last week, while we know there was a peace dialogue happening, all suddenly after August 20th, why do we came back to this war again?
Ahmed Yassin, and that's the unfortunate thing. Again, we will never know, because both sides would lie. We would never know who shot the first bullet. And in war there's always two sides to that story. Especially in this situation where there's no free, independent media, it would be very difficult. Each side will say the other side. But we came to this point, in my opinion, because Tigray got squeezed to a level of unbearable situation. As Somali say, if you close a cat in a room, it will scratch to the extent possible. I think the siege became too long. And that siege is basically making a very politicized dialogue and negotiation between the two irrelevant. I think if the siege was lifted, particularly siege for services, I think Tigray's hand or TDF's hand would have been tied. I think the fact that Abiy used the siege to create dissidents and opposition voice within Tigray, and Tigray people getting frustrated to the extent possible. The negotiation that Ethiopia wanted, which was very slow and politicized, and these guys wanted a negotiation dialogue that's quick and deliverable material to be received, it just could not be sustained. And the international world failed to give the dialogue and the peace talks more of a punchline and timeline and deliverables. It dragged too. If we saw some improvement, which a little bit we saw, but not to an extent. See, the two sides need to see the gain from the dialogue. And I think what we have now is that TDF, TPLF side was not seeing the benefit, whereas Abiy was seeing. As you recall, a day before the war started, and we say we don't know who started, Ethiopia received a huge cash from World Bank and USAID, all that to the tune of $350 million dollars. So the dialogue, in my opinion, failed. The international didn't do for Ethiopia what they did for the Yugoslavia, and the whole concept, and we can talk about the whole concept of Africa for Africa doesn't work because Africa does not have, huge institutions that resolve the conflict. And so the war is unfortunate to come back, and the Ethiopian people, particularly, you're right, the northern Ethiopian people are hurting in a way that neither Abiy nor Debretsion is hurting. It's the masses, it's the millions of people who within 2 years or 3 years lost billions and billions of dollars of development dollar in addition to lives.
Okay. Gulet, from somebody who's outsider, served the military, understand the geopolitics of Ethiopia. You share the perspective of both Atnafu and Faisal. What's your perspective, and why the failure of the international community? And then if you connect the dots in terms of like Faisal said that over $300 million the day after the day they received, then that's the one the war all suddenly started. And before was we come into the table, that's dialogue, and U.S. State Department and special envoys were there, and then all suddenly we are in this situation. What's your perspective?
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, gentlemen. I really enjoyed listening to their analysis. I think if I may go back a bit, generally speaking, a civil war, which is in effect what is going on in Ethiopia, benefits no one, because then what ends up happening is the infrastructure gets destroyed. Young people have to defend their physical homes, which makes their homes in their areas and their neighborhoods unsafe. So if we back up a bit, Ethiopia, from a perspective of an outsider, let's say from Somali perspective or from a global perspective, when the transition happened from the previous government to Abiy's government, Somalia, as it was felt a bit of relief, a bit of political relief. There was heavy-handed political pressure from a much bigger neighbor. So the immediate reaction for Somalia was, well, we want this change because it relieved some political pressure and tensions. The secondary reaction in terms of the global sort of mindset was that everyone saw that there was a political change in Ethiopia due to mass protests, due to the vast proportion of the population requesting to have a change. So I think from the onset, both the Somali immediate reaction and the immediate result thereof, and the international sort of accounting of what took place in Ethiopia were both in a way positive. And that Ethiopia was becoming more politically, I don't want to say mature, but was growing a bit politically. Now, the immediate after effect, as the two gentlemen, friend Tnafu and Mr. Faisal mentioned, very shortly thereafter, it dissolved into a civil war. I mean, you can sort of, a government can label a party within its country anything it wants. It could call it a terrorist organization. It can call it, because it's the government, it holds the pen. But in effect, it was a civil war, and that wiped away much of that initial positive sort of image that the international community gave Ethiopia, in all fairness. Now, zoom out a bit, I think had the conflict stayed within combatants, it would have been something. But I think the fact that the suffering has devolved into population, that adds to the further decline of that initial image that Ethiopia received as the transition came. From a Somali perspective, I think there was a very welcoming change, to say the least. I think the previous government, maybe by default, because again, they came in at the same time, Somalia broke apart, Ethiopia broke apart. But the dynamic was that the international community rushed to aid Ethiopia, to stabilize Ethiopia, and not so much to stabilize Somalia, which is the Somali perspective. The interesting thing then was that in that development of the previous regime, from Meles Zenawi on, Ethiopia solidified its presence in the Horn of Africa, and by extension in Africa, forget the Red Sea corridor, in Africa. So what that then made Ethiopia was sort of the gold standard of how to address stability. Because much of Africa in the 90s and early 2000s was facing stability issues. And so the shock then that masses demanded a change. So it had recreated the image of Ethiopia that everybody else has. Today, from the outside looking in, if someone was to assess Ethiopia, it's a question mark. Correct? I know the history of Ethiopia, but somebody on the outside, if you ask them, where is Ethiopia now, where is it going? We don't know. It's Jekyll and Hyde. This government came as a result of the people. It was supposed to be very democratic. And in some ways, it seems very democratic. But in some ways, in terms of how the civil war has been managed. So I think and that's the geopolitical perspective. I think militarily, it's very difficult for a liberation front, sort of, I guess in the Somali word we use jabhat, right? Any armed military group, it's virtually impossible for a group to defeat a government in the present 21st century. It is virtually impossible. There are just too many issues.
Having said that, Gulet, well, where will Ethiopia go? Is the question, and the question, the follow-up question on that part is that then I want to everyone to get their chance to answer after this is, can this war be won by fighting one side or the other? And has Ethiopia ever won a guerrilla fight, like on the left and Ethiopian government until they become peace talk over what, how many years, and before that, and the OLF as well. Still, there's a fighting going on with the OLF. So even TPLF, when they were in power, they minimized it, but the war was happening. So what's the way out on this kind of situation as militarily? And
well, I mean, historically, from a military sense, a guerrilla cannot defeat a government. I mean, the odds are very, very small.
Can government
but
defeat
on the other hand, if the guerrilla's ideology is based on their existence, their ability to continue existing as a people, then it's impossible to also wipe away a guerrilla. So from a military sense, as Nafo can also attest to this, military's job is to defeat the enemy. But the problem is, if the enemy and you look the same, speak the same language, are generally equally trained, you're using the same methods. And by default, you're going to use the same military sort of guns and tools. So it becomes a war of attrition. And in that sense, in a real sense, government always wins. But the net result is going to be nobody wins in the real world, because you've destroyed your own country. Now, in terms of the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, obviously he is able to have more information than we are sitting on the outside. But in the real sense of it, his job is the safety and the security of 100-some million people. If these different conflicts within Ethiopia that is simmering is not taken under control, and it bleeds into neighboring countries. You saw what happened. Somalia, a very small country, broke apart. Its instability bled into other areas. I want you to imagine a country that is 110+ million people, and if that instability explodes, and it bleeds into the rest of the Horn, I think it becomes a global catastrophe. So it is primary responsibility in finding a solution to this has to rest with the Prime Minister.
Okay, Atnafu, can this war be won by?
Well, yeah, my friend Gulet said the guerrillas fighters cannot win any government in the 21st century. I don't agree on that, honestly, with respect, Mr. Derg government was defeated by the guerrilla fighters of TPLF and Eritrean guerrilla fighters. After Eritrea fought 30 years against the Ethiopian government, and TPLF fought 17 years, and other LF or NLF were fighting on their side too. But the guerrillas can win provided that they have a legitimate cause and they have a political strategy to rally the citizens and the public the support they needed to fight against the government. It's both sides. If the government's political system is eroded and the government had the people had no confidence on its own government, that will be beneficiary to any guerrilla fighter to benefit that part to its own goal. That's what happened during the Derg. Many Ethiopians were really fed up of the Derg regime, and they didn't expect that Eritrea will succeed. They didn't expect that TPLF will bring this havoc to the Ethiopian people. They thought that anything was better than Derg, and they were directly or indirectly supporting any fight against the Derg regime, and the Derg cannot do anything. Having like 500,000 army, air force, and strong, heavy armament, which I was involved with too. So after a big fight and a big loss of human life on both sides, on every side, Derg lost its power because its political system failed. That's what it is. It's what I am feeling now is, on one hand, you have the federal government, which people are losing any credibility and hope on its own government. You have state governments that are not really trusted by its own people because they are there to serve the federal government as a puppet, as echo, not serving the people's interests they are supposed to do. Whether it's Amara region, Oromia region, Somali region, you can tell. You go in everywhere and ask the people whether they are satisfied by their own state government. I don't think if there is a polling like it is being happening in developed countries, Canada, America, and other countries, you will see that the trust, the credibility of the government, whether it is federal or state government, is shrinking. That's dangerous. That's dangerous. When you see that people are losing. Look now when now the TPLF started the second round of war, whether they started it or it was started by the government, they are coming to the Amara region now, the same way they did come a year ago. Okay, what was the federal government and the Amara state government doing until now after the war? The previous war was trying to diminish the capacity of the Amhara to defend themselves. They were rounding up the Fanos, the users who were training themselves and to protect their own community. They were arresting them. Even now, when there is a war, they are arresting them. So you have the government on one side, and you have what you call the enemy who trying to conquer you. Then what you think is the people's action would be? Should they fight alongside with the government, or should they align to the rebels and fight against the government? This is a dilemma we are in, which is very, very, very dangerous. And yes, the guerrillas can win, but in terms of generality in Ethiopia now, what's going on? Suppose TPLF loses the war. If TPLF loses the war, they may lose the battle, but the war may continue in different forms, like a guerrilla. Okay, if they start fighting as a guerrilla, that may sustain like many years. And if you see the Ethiopian economy now, the poverty and everything into account, the international community and other wars. It's not only, the government is not waging war only against the PLA. They are waging war in Oromia region. They are waging war.
Okay.
They have a tension with Sudan. And we believe Sudan occupied part of the Amara region for over a year, almost 2 years now. And on the Somali side, on the Gambela side, on Benshangul Gumus side, everywhere you go, there is a conflict. And that conflict will erupt and it could be out of control. And if it is out of control, that civil war may face Ethiopia be the failed state like Libya and other countries. That's the scary part of it is that. So instead of assuming one party or one group win the war, the best solution for me is to resolve any conflict. It's a political.
Yeah, we will get back to the solution. We'll get back to the solution. So, 2 points, Faisal. One that Tnafu just mentioned about the Amhara regional administration and what the Fano is doing, because the Amharas are not all at one group. The Gondares, Gojam, and Wallo area, each one of them have a different perspective of this war, because previously when they fight alongside the government, but now there's a division. While you're connecting that, I want you to go back to Gulet and Atnaf, both of them, about the guerrilla. Can this guerrilla, TBLF or the Tigray Defense Force, can they win this war? Or on the other hand, the Ethiopian federal government, can they win this war? So we just want to analyze that. Then with the solution we can go. So what's the perspective on those two things? And you can add anything else. You're muted, so.
I agree with them in a broader context. The government can never win this war. See, government's function and purpose is different than a guerrilla or a group like TPLF, who have limited responsibility at this point in time. The government is responsible for the 120 million that Gulet was talking about, including the 6+ million Tigrays, whether Abiy likes it or not. So when a child dies in Tigray or becomes impoverished, when Somali region is invaded by Al-Shabaab, when the Amara infrastructure is destroyed, or the Oromos have been decimated, as it is going today, the loser is neither Ola, nor TPLF, nor Al-Shabaab, nor anybody. It's Abiy. So he already lost. He already lost a country that inherited, that needed adjustment from the point of good governance and what have you, and bring TPLF's heavy hand into a limited. But the economy was comparatively functioning very well. Ethiopia was growing at the rate of 10% annually. It was really joining what they call the mid-level type economic success. And, that's the World Bank kind of thing. I'm not saying everybody was getting that trickle down, but there was a decent economic reform and growth and industrialization taking place in some limited parts of the Ethiopian economy. And life was not as expensive as it is today. A piece of onion was not costing 60 birr, or a bottle of oil was not costing 1,000 birr, which is 1/3 of a typical salary of an Ethiopian government employee. So there, if you go down the list, the government has already lost. This government has no longer a purpose to advance except to contain the bleeding, and that bleeding is not stopping. Actually, the bleeding is becoming profusely and touching areas, as Atnafu said and you said, that were part of the domain of the Abiy government. There's no more trust by the Amara, which is a very, very important community in the Ethiopian body politic. They gave him a boost when he came in. The Oromo have given him a boost when he came in. He doesn't have both. And even the Somalis, who were one of the most optimistic group about Abiy, as you recall, Somali region was the first place where he visited. Today, I would say the largest, as much as the Amara or the Oromo, Somalis don't want to hear his name except limited groups of people around the power corridor. So Abiy has already lost from a government point of view, from the national leader of this experiment called Ethiopia. Abiy has lost. With TPLF, as long as they bleed and cause havoc to the state and make sure that the government is not stable, that is a win for them. See, the threshold, the yardstick by which we measure who is succeeding and who is not, is completely different. Expectation from TPLF is small. They can come to COPA and tomorrow leave. That gives a huge boost to the supporters of TPLF, whereas it kills the morale of the people who are supporting a leader who is managing a 120 million country. And that's what's happening right now as we speak. In a 3 to 7 days, they are Alameda, which is just off of the shores of Desse, the third or second largest industrial city in Ethiopia. And so basically, in a way, Abiy has lost the war. Now, can a guerrilla like TPLF win this kind of war? There may be some scenarios that they could win, although I do suspect that the 2022 TPLF goals are the same as the 2019-90. I think their goals are different today than that one, where TPLF, EPLF, and then ONLF on the east and were different. Anybody who marches to Addis Ababa faster and quicker could win the war and capture the state. And that's what happened. I don't think that is possible for TPLF at this point in time, because the 27 years have risen ghosts that didn't exist in 1990 against TPLF. And I'm sure they are aware of that. But they may bring, if they get some success in the military arena, they may change the formula. I think the formula could be where OLA and OLF marches to Addis Ababa and then strike a deal with some of the periphery groups. The era where TPLF can sit at Kilo, in my opinion, is done. If they are not aware of that, TPLF and TDF leaders, if they are not aware of that, they must be dreaming or drinking Kool-Aid. So I do think their formula would be different. Can a government as big as Ethiopia be defeated? Yes, I think I agree with that, Nafo. I think at the end of the day, people fight not only with weapons, but also with what we call the war narrative. I was speaking at some Somali forum yesterday, Al-Shabaab. You have to have the hardware, but that hardware needs to be accompanied by the war narrative, which means the heart, what you are telling people and how people are flocking to you to defend. Last time, Abiy had more support from the Amara people. The very group who supported him, whether you agree or disagree, and I don't agree with Fano and its rhetoric, but the very group that supported him and to a degree made a change has been imprisoned and disarmed for whatever reason. Now he's begging them to come back to the theater. Would they trust 100%? Would they rise to the occasion and defend Abiy? I'm not sure. But I think TPLF, like last time, in my opinion, would have a very difficult time to march to Aret Kilo, but they may come up with a solution that we can talk later on and see how that fits. And maybe they are making drawings on the board as to A, B, C, D as alternatives, where the Ola groups, if they continue.
To clarify a couple of things in terms of guerrilla, cannot win a war, and as well as understanding right now the damage politically, the price that the prime minister is paying it. And I want you to connect the Somali Afar conflict and how, from the Somali perspective, Al-Shabaab is already at the border of Somali region. There's a war going on Sudan and Ethiopia, or it looks like there's Egypt in terms of the GER. Everywhere you look at it in Ethiopia, there is a pocket of conflicts happening. The Ola now it's already in some way somehow is fighting with Afar. So connect the dots and try to see
Yeah.
this conflict. How long can it go on? And
Yeah.
what is the role of the international community? Faisal,
No,
you
I
want to add
think,
something?
yeah, I think all that is bleeding Addis and Abiy, Sudan, Egypt, what have you, Al Shabaab. But Ethiopia is not a small, simple country. It has capacity to absorb wounds, and historically, that's where I was talking about narrative. I think outside Somalis, particularly the three major ethnic groups in Ethiopia and some southern groups, uh, had a narrative that is always utilized when there is a war situation, particularly external. You know, the defeat of Italy, the Ethiopia that never been colonized. Not only that rings bell with Ethiopians of certain sections, but also through the black race, no matter what, and a lot of liberal whites throughout the world, and that's still there. But that needs the right technician to use. People like Mullah Zinawi used. I was just reading yesterday Tedla Mehru's article that he wrote on Ethiopia's diplomacy, who's now a big spokesperson for TPLF, and he's calling Somalis irritant, everything that anybody else calls Somalis, whether it's Haile Selassie or Mengistu, he's calling, but today he's a different. So there is this narrative that feeds Ethiopia to withstand some pressures and, and comes to the plate. Also, I don't believe an open war will take place between Ethiopia and Sudan. I don't think there would be an open, and it's possible, but I don't think there would be an open war where Egyptian planes would come and hit the Kurd. That's a far-fetched. It's always possible, but that's a far-fetched. What's possible is for these groups or countries to help TPLF reach Western Tigray so that they can have access and get ammunition. Yes, Ethiopia is very, very strained at this point in time, very thinly strained. And that's where Atnafu and I were saying, Abiy lost the power. See, with winning a power, it's not only shooting your enemy, it's also sometimes making your enemy, putting your enemy in a position where he can no longer lift a finger. If you drag your enemy to a point where they cannot get up in the morning and go to work and pay the bills, you kill them. I think what's happening now with Abiy is he has been killed. International is still there with Abiy, and still they want Abiy's government to function, but day by day, the tolerance towards him is minimizing.
I know.
Easily, yeah.
Yeah, I know Atnafu would like to respond a few
Yeah,
points
yeah.
you
Well,
made, but I will give you Atnafu, but I just want Gulet to respond himself about the gorilla. Then I will give you Atnafu to respond about the Western Tigray or Walkai. It's a loaded word,
oh,
and
yeah.
or the
The
you
new
know what I'm talking about. So go ahead, Gulet.
I think I agree in a general sense. I don't see a war per se, direct war between Ethiopia and Sudan. I think if we just zoom out a little bit, if you look at right now, the hottest war, if you will, is one Russia and Ukraine. And both of them are winning or losing by virtue of not strategy, but by virtue of aid in terms of weapons, in terms of every bullet that's fired has to be replaced, in terms of logistics, in terms of all this new fancy communication systems, Zoom, the drones, and so forth. So I think if I qualify my earlier assessment, maybe I'm doubling down. This is the 21st century. It's very, very difficult for a standing guerrilla in Ethiopia today to defeat the government in Ethiopia, unless they win the masses. And I think that's where the change is. But on a militaristic standpoint, it's very, very difficult. In terms of Sudan and Ethiopia, I think that has a broader sort of issue with lands that have gray lines where the line has never been really demarcated correctly. The lines have always been made by power or international aid. And I think wherever the international diplomatic efforts are, is where all of this is going to settle at the end. So I'm going to answer in general terms because a lot of times I try not to get deep into the Ethiopia politics.
What about Al-Shabaab and Somali region?
I think the Al-Shabaab and Somali region Shabaab is in effect a fighting a guerrilla force. And from that sense, they're always looking for opportunities. And the opportunity that they saw was a distracted Ethiopia. The opportunity they saw is an Ethiopia that is looking toward the north, looking at Egypt, looking at Sudan. In that sense, Shabab is just like any guerrilla force. They're looking for international partners to supply them. They don't have weapon factories. They're looking for international organizations or people on the outside of Ethiopia, outside of the Horn of Africa, to assist them with funding and logistics and direction. So my sense is that Shabab sees an opportunity, a weakened and distracted Ethiopia militaristically, and they want to take the opportunity. I think the problem with the current Ethiopian government is it lacks focus, both from a government services perspective. It lacks focus in terms of unifying the people of Ethiopia, and it lacks focus in its actual fight with TPLF. And in that sense, it cannot win. So to answer the general question, in the sense of how does the outside world assess what's going on in Ethiopia? The two gentlemen said it exactly right. The shine is off. Abiy came in with a lot of hope and support, and that shine is off. And day by day, he's bleeding, pardon the term, but he's bleeding international support. Now, he can always turn it around because he is a government. And despotic rulers have always found a way to get support. So diplomatically, he can turn it around, but he has to show something that is focused. It's very out of focus in terms of government support again and military response.
Okay. All right, Knafu.
Yeah, well, we are dipping into a lot of national and international issues at the same time. It may be too big to us to discuss all these things at one time. But if I try to focus on the Ethiopian politics, where Mr. Faisal mentioned if the PLF has to win, they may have to change their formula. One of the changes working with OLA, Oromo Liberation Army, and others. This is not a new thing. They have been working with OLA during the previous war. But I don't think the Ethiopian people will take this type of alliance as a positive side, even though they have issues against the current government. Most of the Ethiopian people are really concerned about the unity of the country. Not only the Ethiopian people, the international community as well. We don't want, or many Ethiopians do not want, the Ethiopian unity to be compromised during this conflict. And if the TPLF is trying to use this alliance as winning the war, I don't think they will win the war. I think the vital, if there is any to change this government, is the TPLF's relationship with Amhara and other Ethiopians as well. Now, well, we mentioned about the Ethiopian state formation, which my friend Mr. Faisal said, the Ethiopian state formation. There is a debate on that. I don't want to go into it. He mentioned some of the historical perspectives that I may not agree. I think the Ethiopian statehood is complete. We have international boundaries and already, and we have to acknowledge it if we want to make a change to our people. We may have differences how this country is created, but that's not different from any creation of any statehood in the world. So there were issues, yes, but Ethiopia is Ethiopia. That's what it is, and we need to believe we are Ethiopians. We may have different culture, religion, and beliefs. That's one of the root problem of this conflict. And after TPLF came into power, 1991, that the pan-Ethiopianism was diminished, and everybody was thinking about its own ethnic group and historical perspectives. And we need to get out of that if we have to think about our people. That's my point. And the other is, if TPLF wants to succeed, I think the recipe is it is relationship with the Amhara people. So long as they believe that Amhara is their enemy, and so long as Amhara thinks that the TPLF or the Tigray people are a threat to their own survival, they're not going to anywhere. The government may lose the war or the conflict, but the fight will continue. I think those people who believe that the Ethiopian integrity and unity has to be preserved will win at the end of the day, because that's the majority of the people, I think. So,
at NAPU, on that part, you say that if the TPLF need to succeed, well, TPLF, we know historically what they have done.
Yeah.
What will the federal government need to do to defeat TPLF?
Well, the problem, the federal government to defeat the TPLF, to defeat anyone, the federal government has to show to its citizens that they are working for all. I don't prescribe any state to give up for Abiy. You know what I mean? Including TPLF. I wish the Amhara challenged the Abiy government so that they will have their own voice representing what they say they represent the Amhara community. The Somali is the same thing. But what's happening now, what this government is doing now, is not acceptable for anyone, including the Oromos. That is the root cause of the problem. So that's where the challenge is, to say, okay, let's be with support the government and defeat the TPLF, and then what? What do you get? This government will consolidate power and crush everybody that they have been doing, showing us for the last 3 years. And they're trying to Oromize the country. Well, see what's going on in Addis Ababa. See what's going on in all sets places, banks and other places, the economy and everything, the corruption. And they didn't learn anything from TPLF. Why we were fighting against TPLF, you and me and others, for the last 27 years before this reform came into being, because they were not fair. They tried to monopolize the military, they monopolized the economy, and everybody else was their satellite. Okay. So the Abiy government is following in the worst form, even worse than the TPLF, that they're trying to work for the benefit of the Oromos against the interests of everybody. So I don't want to prescribe the government to tell them win TPLF, because my prescription is the TPLF, the Tigray people, be part and parcel of Ethiopian politics through negotiation and play a role. Not really to be defeated, and doesn't bring you democracy, doesn't bring you anything better than what we had in the last 30 years. Even it's going to be worse than that. So I cannot prescribe for the government to win.
I get you. I know you lost appetite because you've been advising a lot of stuff.
Oh yeah, I have been telling them. Yeah. I have been. So, but no, they're not listening.
But at the same time, right now, Faisal, we are in this mess, and government that's not been challenged will never bring solution. The international community are failing, literally. So the question that need to be answered is this: in terms of policy, because there is more conflict right now in Ethiopia than any other time in Ethiopian history. Uh, uh, People might argue differently, but at the same time, we saw what happened in Somali region, because I want to localize this one. We saw what happened in Somali region after Somali fighting. The regional administration didn't say a beep on it in terms of the TV, in terms of how they show the reactions, what's happening in Al Shabaab. The president and administration, the regional administration were everywhere. But when it comes to Afar Somali conflict, we didn't hear anything. We actually here we invited the Minister of Information, but it's after too much pressure that we have done. What is this a policy of the PP party that there should be a conflict everywhere, and why is this?
Yeah, just a couple of things I like to touch before I jump onto that, and that's I think Guled is right. I think the challenge of the government is bullets are expensive, and hardware in the war in the 21st century is extremely expensive. I don't think the Ethiopian government can afford, neither can TDF afford, but the war with the TDF is that they're moving, they're mobile, they're people's war that they're fighting. So a Kalashnikov is enough. They don't carry heavy weapons. They don't need sorties of jets and drone where every sortie cost is millions and hundreds of millions of dollars. So that is again a burden on Abiy. Also, I think with Adnafu, I just qualify when we talk about the Ethiopian people. I think Ola also says they represent the Ethiopian people. TPLF says they represent sections of the Ethiopian people. And nobody has monopoly of defining who the Ethiopian people are. Even the Somalis are included in the Ethiopian people in the debates. And is their heart the same as everybody? No. So while I respect that there is always a center and a middle, but I think Ethiopian people should never be defined by one side or another. I think it's a very fluid concept. And also, when I say Ethiopia is an experiment, I mean, Wallace Soyinka, a Nobel laureate in African literature, calls Somalis and some parts of, or some societies of Nigeria, the sore of Africa, the bruise of Africa, meaning that there are artificial governmental boundaries that have been created either by the colonial or so Soyinka doesn't even see big countries like Nigeria and these boundaries as a permanent thing. In your lifetime and in my lifetime, Ethiopia has changed it. Eritrea was part of Ethiopia when I was in junior high. Today, Eritrea is a full-fledged country. And as you say, if Abiy mishandles Tigray, they may never be winning the war, but they may change the map of Ethiopia. If the Somali situation continues the way it is, which has never been really integrated into the body politic of Ethiopia, Somali region may change. So I think when I say Ethiopia is an experiment and it's a sort of unstable and, if you will, state-making formation, Markakis talks very well how Ethiopia's state is kind of in the making. Having said that, I think nobody can really predict what can come out of this war. If I go to your question, and I don't expect this war to end in a way where TPLF becomes victorious, but at the same time, I don't see in a situation where this war becomes a situation where Abiy destroys and completely gets rid of TPLF. TPLF, TDF is woven into the fabric of their community. It's the same way that ONLF is part of the fabric of the Somali community, but now just opted for peace. Now, with the Somali situation, and you know, I have more rights, and I can talk back to my boss, although he pays my salary. I can talk back to my boss more than the Somali regional leaders can talk to their boss Abiy. I mean, it is a very unique situation for a Somali regional government to not even cover the problems faced in its region, whereas other Ethiopian media, including some of them inside Addis, covering. What is this? Is this a problem with the president? Is this a problem with the setup? Is this a problem of what Adnaf was talking, which is the entire country has been suffocated by Abiy and his policy? I think there are variations and differences. I think some groups and some even regional governments in Ethiopia can say and talk about some issues. Every now and then you see Amara leaders, after out of frustration, talking about some real issues, and then they will be called. You could see that in the southern. You could see now the Gurage movement for statehood and all that. People speak. You have seen Oromo regional media talking about how they long for land and districts as far down as Chichiga. The Somali regional government is the most imbecile, the most subjugated, debased, humiliated, suppressed region. And I think most of that comes from its own leaders, because even within the Abiy system, you are allowed to push a little bit, push back and forth a little bit. I think the Somalis, because of their history, because of the mental torture that they have seen, because of the quality of leaders in terms of being opportunistic, it's a unique situation. And also they don't have really, I don't know, it's Mustafa is supposed to be close to Abiy. And, you know, when you close to the leadership, sometimes you get a little benefit out of that. And that's benefit is even sometimes what they call image making. The Somali regional government is not even given a chance to cheat and lie to its people in the form of image making, to pronounce and discuss issues on its national TV, and then act like they are doing something. Governments do that. You guys covered about the Somali issue and about Ethiopian politics more than the entire Somali regional, despite that they have an entire ministry spending millions of dollars annually. And I think that is a very sad commentary. This Somali region is the only region that doesn't have a newspaper that comes on Somali. It doesn't have a TV that tells the public anything. The thing that Abdi Ilay left is still as it was. He replaced Abdi Ilay, but his culture and his image is still maintained. So,
okay,
it's a sad story.
Faisal, you put very harshly and softly at the same time. But we are on the last last 5 minutes, which is going to wrap it up. Guled, in terms of if you want to, from Somali perspective, for Somali region, what you think, and we have Somalis have the same hope that Abiy was. How everybody was hoping Abiy to succeed. The Somalis have a lot of hope how Mustafa wants to succeed, but there is a mixed message going on, or mixed analysis of the job that the administration is doing it. So your perspective on that, and what do you think the way out is for last 2 minutes?
Yeah, I think the way out, I believe Faisal and Atnaf, who mentioned at the very beginning, Abiy inherited a growing economy. Abiy inherited a fairly stable government country. And the expectation was adjustment. From a Somalia perspective, the adjustment from a Somalia perspective, the adjustment of the sort of the heavy-handed Ethiopian presence and involvement within the internal Somali politics was welcome. From the Somali region perspective, certainly the rate of militarization or the immediacy that military response or there's a heavy-handed response to the population at the early on was accepted as well. What has changed from that point is what we've been discussing. Granted, maybe slightly different perspectives, but the same thing. The stability that he walked in the door is gone. The economic growth and projections that he walked in is gone. And the clout that certainly Ethiopia was the stable giant in the Horn of Africa, that is gone as well. The ironic thing, I was just reading a message from someone, is that from a Somalia perspective, there is a crossroads. You know, in terms of Somalia, the political differences or the political solutions have been met. So the only issue is implementing them, right? The framework, the political framework of people living together and how they live together, and demarcations have been set. So now the issue for Somalia, per se, is to implement that. I think the general dialogue in Ethiopia has yet to happen in the full sense of what is Ethiopia, what is the, and all government is a work of experimentation. But there is no experimentation. So the way forward is for rests with the man at the top. The prime minister has to experiment with ways in concluding this conflict in a peaceful way. He has to experiment for the benefit of the economy, to fight inflation. The absolute sort of pressures that are coming his way. Now, if I may, again, from a Somalia perspective, I think for the Somali region, many of us got involved in, and I did, in the politics, mainly for human rights. And Yasin at NAFU go many years. We're going to Congress, the US Congress, and basically advocating for human rights. And that was the EPRDF government. But by extension, in the Somali region, there was a government that had been practicing continuous human rights violations and oppressions. And that's the thing that drew many people, me, to look at the Horn of Africa and see what I can do. So I think there is a dramatic and drastic difference in that sense between the previous president of the Somali region and the current one. I think the random arrests were certainly are gone. Jail Ogaden, if you all remember, and I remember we interviewed once a woman whose it's I apologize, very graphic, but parts of her anatomy, her chest, were severed as a retaliation. So I think those extremes are gone, and I think to the benefits of everyone. The issue with the TPLF dynamic is one of power, and that is something that does not trickle down to the Somali region, in the Somali population in Ethiopia. The idea of having power of all of Ethiopia is too far-reaching for the Somali people. So I think the current government in the Somali region is far from perfect. I think they have a lot of issues I need to realize. I think the security sector needs much more maturity and growth. But I think in comparison to previous, they are much better in terms of human rights, which is the very thing that pulled many of us in. They do have issues with management in terms of social services, but I think it's a much better conversation than when the previous government was there. We didn't discuss social services with the previous government. So I think I'm giving a Somali perspective, both from Somalia and the Somali region. But overall, Ethiopia as a country is in a very unstable, uncertain path, and that is dangerous for Ethiopia and the Horn of Africa. And I think the leader of the country is always, the buck stops with him. So the primary individual who's responsible for ensuring peace, safe, and stability.
Okay, thank you, Gulet. I'm going to push it a little bit quicker now because we have another show that we need to do. At Nafu, the Amhara region right now is in a same boat that the Somali region is. There is war that's happening everywhere. Within one side in there's always flare-ups between the Oromo and Amharas. There's a flare-up between Amharas and the Tigrayan, and the Amhara administration is almost acting the same way that the Somali administration is acting. And this is not something unique to one side. When you look at Gambela, when you look at Benishangul, when you look at it, so the symptom, then we cannot just say that, okay, this is only on us, because if I don't know what's happening in the Amhara region, and I'm only seeing what's happening in Somali, I'm looking at it in a vacuum, I'm in a bubble. I'm just saying that it's only us. But it is everywhere. Is this by design, number one? Number two, I'm going to ask you is that, can the Amhara region survive in this situation? Because the Gondres and the Gojamans are not getting along, and there's competition continuously. One time, the prime minister and they are rewarding the Gondres, the Fano Gondres, while they're punishing the Gojam Fanos. So, how can this be sustained, and what is the way out for the Amhara regional administration? Speaking as an Amhara person, not as an Ethiopian, by the way. I know you're not going to like that.
I'm boss. Anyway, I think we are all boss. So, well,
that's the conclusion. And do your
conclusion.
It's
a tricky question. Yes, you are right, Yasin. Mr. Faisal said the Somali region is the most suffocated and controlled by the central government than any other. I don't agree. It's everybody's problem. Probably where Amhara are the most controlled by the central government than anybody. Then this is a common problem to everyone, not Somalis, not Amharas, or Tigres, to everyone. Let me remind you what the current president of the Oromia region said in their cadres, in their meeting secretly. It came out to the public, if you guys remember, it's about 2 years ago or 1.5 years ago. What he said was, all this problem is coming from the Prosperity Party institutional setup. What Mr. Shimalis told us was, to his selected Oromo elites, what he said was, EPRDF was created to serve the agenda of the Tigray people, which is TPLF. Now we created Prosperity Party to serve the purpose of Oromia. That's what he said. Mr. Faisal, you remember that? It was in public. It was interpreted both in English, in Amharic, in Oromia, Afan Oromo. That's what he said. Everything that we are complaining now from the central government comes from that conceptual establishment of the Prosperity Party. If you go back and see the structure of the EPRDF, it was a coalition of 4 parties, TPLF, and then the Amhara National Democratic Party, and they changed names, and I cannot recall everything. And OPIDIO, the Oromo People's Democratic Party or organization, and the Southern People's Democratic Party. These 4 had semi-autonomous. They were not one party. It was not a unified party. It was a coalition of 4 parties, even though TPLF had a role to play more than any of them because of their weakness and their establishments. They were created to serve the purpose of TPLF. True, it was. Because the TPLF dominated the military, the intelligence, the economy, and everything. If you have all this, then the rest just command. But literally, in terms of the party structure, they had more autonomous than what we have at PP. The Prosperity Party, what they did is they dismantled the paradigm structure and they said, we have done one party president, which is Abiy Ahmed. Okay? And the rest of us, Mustafa or the Amara people's, the Amara president or the Gambela president, they report to, they are assigned by the party. They can be fired by the party. And since they were not fully democratically elected by the respective people, what they are afraid is their boss, who is the party leader, who is Abiy Ahmed. Then they serve his agenda. That's what comes. It's not only Mustafa, it's not only Yilika, it's not only Mr.
Shimalis or anybody
else. So it comes from the structure, and the tricky structure that these guys are having a one-party system. When they wanted it, they call it Oromia PP, Amara PP, Somali PP, Gambela PP, and they control everything. Not only four, they made all regional states are members of this party. When they plan and structure this party, they want to make sure that they are going to be the ruling party forever. You come up as a Somali party, you can only compete in the Somali region, and you'll never be a national party. You'll never beat to control the central power.
Okay.
And
yeah, just try to, from the Amhara perspective.
From the Amhara perspective, the Amhara perspective.
And then how is the way out and make it 1 minute?
Okay. From the Amhara perspective, what I can tell you is Amharas are the most dominated before, during the TPLF, led EPRDF, and now, even now. The leader, the president was killed. What are you talking about? The president was killed. The president and 4 prominent leaders were killed. And but 2.5 years ago, it was through the conspiracy of this intelligence system that they were eliminated. So now the Amhara cannot assign even its own special force leader. He was fired. And the Amhara Special Force elites were jailed and fired. And in terms of this, the Amharas are being meant to bend down and accept any authority from Abiy. Okay, so can they survive? I believe they can survive. How they survive? I don't think the Amhara people will survive by condoning the government, the state government or the federal government. They have to have their own, way of struggling to survive out of reach of the government. They don't have the government they can trust, whether it is in the state or in the central government. How do they do it? I don't want to tell you there, but I think I trust the wisdom of the Amhara people, what they can do to survive, because they don't have any option. They have been attacked and killed in everywhere, literally, not only out of their boundaries, but inside the Amhara region also. They have been attacked. The cities were burned down, not only by TPLF, by other forces, especially including the Oromo Special Forces.
I think we'll have continued conversation about this, and I want to extend thanks for everybody, and I want to invite Faisal again, but I'll give you, Faisal, the last word on both the bigger picture of this war, what's happening, and bringing locally to the Somali community as well.
No, I think I agree with you. Probably you need another show on how each group is hurt, and I totally agree with both of them. I think Somalis are hurting. I think Amharas are hurting, to be honest with you. I mean, we're talking about 200 billion birr destruction. The last 30 years, what they have been building has been decimated. How that building came, we don't care, but these people suffered as much as Tigray suffered. So, you know, again, whether it was EPRDF time or PP, there is always autocratic rule, and that autocratic rule, always there is a Western hand. In 1996, I went to Abdulmajid Hussein's house, Allah yarhamu, and at the time he was coming from a discussion, ministerial discussion with Mullah Zinawi, and they were discussing if Samuel Huntington is the third wave, which says beat the opposition, bring them up, and then bust them. That was the, the ideology at the time that EPRDF was using, and Samuel Huntington was commissioned by USAID Development, Aid and Development, to write a pamphlet of 20 pages, and I wrote an article on that where he said, create an autocratic rule, because Ethiopia doesn't have a working class or a middle class. Therefore, the peasant class, which is what Malas wanted, should dominate. And basically, he was given the free card to create an autocratic system by Samuel Huntington, who was the dean of American political science at the time. Now with Abiy, he has Beasley, the World Food Organization, who is a Pentecostal, who is literally doing the dirty work that Abiy needs at the international. So always our autocratic rulers have roots also in the West. It's not just popping up. I think I very much empathize with all the groups hurting, particularly where the war is raging now, in the Amara region, in the Oromia region, in the Tigray region. And I think there has to be a solution for the sake of the people to get out of. I think the Amhara and Tigray people, in my opinion, who are very brothers, maybe in the past their alliance was on merely historical, and that Amhara-Tigray alliance, I think they need people to people kind of talk. I don't think Abiy will reconcile the Amhara and the Tigray masses and people. I think these are brothers, like Somalis are brothers with their neighbors, whether it's Oromo or not. I think we need a way to find to bring the Amhara and the Tigray people together so that they can recognize their issues. And that's a long journey, but that's one way. I think the West needs to stop pumping money and weapons to Ethiopia, because Ethiopia is, quote unquote, what Guled was talking, anchor country that protects the West's interest in the Horn of Africa. I think we want Ethiopia to transform itself into an African genuine power that brings its people and neighbors together, as opposed to being a satellite state for the West and the West interest. Our families suffered in the Horn of Africa because Ethiopia was, during Mallas as well as during Haile Mariam and now Abiy, an anchor country that hunts down Muslim and Islamic terrorists in their core. And that's affecting our families and our livelihood. I think there has to be a genuine rethinking of how we can transform Ethiopia as a big country that anchor is not Western interests, but interests of the globe, of the region that it is located. How do we move way forward? I think there has to be a way and a movement towards lifting the siege for Tigray. When we say lift the siege, we're not saying give TPLF weapons and arms. We're saying let the people have services, telephone, get money for their parents. Like you and I send money to our parents. They have the right to receive electricity, what have you. Otherwise, Ethiopia is no longer governing that state if they continue what they are doing. As I said, I think a people-to-people conversation between Amhara and Tigray. And I honestly believe deep down, maybe I'm an all-the-timer, but I think we need to regain that wing of Amhara progressive that changed the history of Ethiopia. Amaras were known to be, Amhara elite were known to be very progressive. They have brought some of the great ideas that moved the needle forward in this country. I think that link is missing, in my opinion. That link that talks, as Atnafu is really articulating, that Amara elite that can talk to Ahmed Yassin and Guled and Tariq and whoever, and Guto, the Oromo, the Gurage. That is the link that the Amara elite miss. If we can regain that, a very progressive coalition is possible that can not only house itself in the north, but also come down to Jigjiga and Somali area. I grew up at a time when Amara kiddies who were hunted down by the Derg would come to the Somali neighborhood to read articles and literature and hide in the Somali neighborhood because fitasha or search in the Somali region or area was less. We need to regain that history. We need to refocus that new narrative as opposed to the PP narrative that on the one hand, as Adnavo was saying, consolidates power under one man, but internally also divides us. Example, how they are pitting the Afar and the Somali purposely, how they armed the Fano, and then right when they used the Fano, disarmed, because PP knows that Amhara Tigrenya genuine alliance could change the face of the history of Ethiopia. And I think with that, there should be a moratorium internationally on any form of airstrike in Ethiopia until peace is conducted. Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Noor is waiting for me on the other side. We have another show, but at NAFU, I'll give you 1 minute because, and then we completely wrap it up. Basically, hard 1 minute. And we want to do this kind of conversation again, Faisal. We will definitely invite you, not only in Somali speaking audience that will keep on demanding me and texting me, why you're not speaking in Somali? And plus, we want you to invite on the Amharic program as well. So because there's Amharic audience that needs to hear the solution and this dialogue. And Atnaf will basically direct that on that. So Atnaf, your last word.
Well, thank you, Yassin. It was a productive dialogue. This has to be continued. You and me and Guled have started this type of dialogue, thinking that Ethiopia is not for one group. Ethiopia is for all Ethiopians. So if you have different perspective, we have to understand one another, each other, listen what's one side of the perspective is, narrow down and have a common perspective to the welfare of our people. That's period. That's our agenda, nothing else. So I still believe this war has to be stopped. This war will destroy the country. It will create a longer pain to our people. Already almost 1 million people died in the previous 2 wars of this conflict for the last 3 years on both sides. And innocent people have been massacred everywhere. And the government is not giving attention to what's going on, to the killings and massacres, and including cannibalization and others. People burned down alive. And this is a very black history of our time, honestly. And on one hand, we are saying that we had 5,000, 4,000 statehood country. Also, we have differences how. On the other hand, we are in the primitive era that people are really fighting very strangely one another. And if it doesn't stop, and if the economy improve, it's going to be a disaster to our community, be it Somali, Amhara, Oromo, Tigray. And the siege has to be lifted. I believe in that. Has nothing to do with any conditions. They have to be lifted. And the people of Tigray has to have proper access for any utility, including humanitarian aid. So this is not something that you suffocate people, 6 million people, and try to
we'll have a different program. We'll discuss more.
Yeah, so that's my idea. So thank you very much.
I'm glad you mentioned we are the only ones who understand what siege is, because as you know, Atnaf, the Somali region, the eastern portion, was under blockade. That the world was writing about the blockade, but they were not even doing anything. So the pain. My mom was alive at that time, and I used to send her medicine. She couldn't get her medicine, diabetic medicine. So thank you.
Right.
Yeah. Gulet, we'll see you on the other side. I know if you want to say anything else, but we'll just wrap it up. Thank you, but we'll have more conversation. Thank you, Faisal. Thank you, Atnafu, and Gulet. I'll see you soon.
Good to meet you, Atnafu.
Thank you very much, Mr. Faisal. I enjoyed